So with Biden gone and Obama's legacy rejected, what is left in the Democratic Party? Well, the answer? The most extreme set of positions in history, a party that believes the best way to make America better is to give terrorists and murderers the right to vote, literally.
If somebody commits a serious crime, sexual assault, murder, they're going to be punished. They may be in jail for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, their whole lives. That's what happens when you commit a serious crime. But I think the right to vote is inherent to our democracy. Yes, even for terrible people.
It wasn't so long ago that no person running as a mainstream candidate for the President of the United States would consider saying something like that. Now, it's the consensus on the left. A decade from now, disagreeing with it might make you a criminal. The pace at which things are moving is fast. Rafael Mangual is a fellow and deputy director of legal policy at the Manhattan Institute, one of our favorite guests. He joins us tonight. So this does seem all of a sudden an idea that your average person, I've got to believe, thinks is lunatic, because it obviously is part of the Democratic catechism. Like, you have to believe this in order to run for president. How did that happen so fast?
Oh, I mean, I think people just bought wholesale into the idea that the criminal justice system could be fairly characterized on the whole as overly oppressive and racially biased. This is what people have been told
exactly
over and over and over again. And, you know, you say it long enough and eventually you'll get enough people to believe it.
Well, that's exactly it. That the system itself is rotten.
That's right.
They've sold us that line for long enough that they themselves start to believe it. I wonder, though, what happens to a society where the justice system is considered illegitimate and racist. I mean, crime spikes, things start to fall apart, no?
That's exactly right. I mean, and we're already kind of seeing little examples of that all around the country, right? I mean, if you look at Baltimore, where police have sort of, you know, really backed off radically in the last few years since the controversy over Freddie Gray's death, you've had, I think, something like a 70% reduction in police-initiated stops. What has followed that? What's followed that has been a serious crime increase that, again, has primarily victimized precisely the populations that these candidates purport to represent, right? We saw the same thing in Chicago. In 2015, at the end of 2015 into 2016, police in Chicago started to back off of self-initiated stops, of stops and frisks, and what happened? That year, murders increased by 58%. There was a study done of this by a criminologist named Paul Cassell, and it was published in the University of Illinois Law Review, and what it found was that 239 of the additional murders in 2016 compared to 15 could be attributed to the police backoff, right? So we know, we have examples of what happens.
Wait, so what you're saying is that guilty white liberals push these policies to ease their own race guilt, and then black people die as a result. But
right. I mean, they proclaim to be representing, you know, minority communities that are, we're told, oppressed by the criminal justice system. But the reality is, and they focus on these statistics, right? One of the things that they like to focus on is the disparity in criminal justice enforcement trends, right? What they never talk about, though, are the disparities in the victimization trends. And when you look at the victimization trends, you find that black men, for example, which constitute less than 7% of the population, make up about half of all murder victims, right? So when we think about who's going to pay the price of the policies that they want to enact, like, for example, cutting the prison population in half, it's going to be precisely those communities that they purport to represent.
Yeah, it's not Pete Buttigieg or Cory Booker who's going to be victimized here. Right, it's people in these neighborhoods. Is there anybody running for president, I know you follow this for a living, on the Democratic side, who has stood apart and said, no, this is crazy, we're going to get higher murder rates, like let's slow down, let's stop attacking the criminal justice system wholesale as racist? Is anybody disagreeing with the trend?
No, and that's actually one of the most kind of concerning things, is this has kind of emerged as one of the single must-pass ideological litmus tests for the Democratic nomination, and so no one, you know, who has any prominence on that side of the aisle has the courage to come forward and say what is plainly true, right? I mean, you know, they talk about, Bernie Sanders released a plan today that says that, you know, mass incarceration, as he calls it, didn't make us any safer. that's just false, right? I mean, there are multiple studies that show that, you know, at the very least, the increase in incarceration is responsible for about 25% of the crime decline from the 1990s peak. That's a lot of lives saved, a lot of lives improved. And, you know, I think they reject these policies that we know clearly worked at the peril of everyone that they claim to represent.
That's right, because they're for chaos. Raphael, thanks so much for that.
Thanks so much for having me.